Move on to the medals and awards. The first is the Rivers Medal. The Rivers Medal for 2023 has been, of the Rivers Medal of the RAI, has been awarded since 1923. So this is the centenary of that medal. We are privileged to award it in this, its 100th year, to Professor Tracy Kivell. As many of you in this audience will already know, Tracy is a paleoanthropologist, formerly professor at the University of Kent, and now director of the Department of Human Origins at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Germany. She's a world-leading expert in the evolution of the hand and wrist, with a particular focus on fossil humans and other hominins. Her innovative research integrates the interpretation of the shape, internal structure, and function of the hand bones, which provides a unique anatomical and behavioral perspective on the involvement of the hand in locomotion and the manipulation of objects, including the use and manufacture of tools. Grounded in a comparative framework of modern primates, Tracy Kivell's research spans from the fossil apes of the Miocene through to the migration of our own species, Homo sapiens, into Arabia just 85,000 years ago, and the even more recent Neanderthals from El Cidron in Spain. Her publications include the first descriptions of hand and wrist bones of recently discovered hominin species such as Homo naledi, forgive me any mispronunciation on this, and Australopithecus sediba, and reveals new evidence concerning the capabilities of other species such as Australopithecus africanus, the first early hominin species to be recognized by science. These and other such findings are published in articles in Science, Nature Communications, and the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Alongside this pioneering scientific work, Tracy Kivell has a prominent role in media activities and promoting the public understanding of science. And in 2021, her European Research Council project, appropriately entitled GRASP, Evolution of the Human Hand Grasping Trees and Tools, was highlighted in the European Research Council campaign to celebrate funding 10,000 grantees. She received her PhD from the University of Toronto in 2007 and continued her research at Duke University, USA, 2007 to 2009, and at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Germany from 2009 to 2013. She was Professor of Biological Anthropology at the University of Kent from 2013 to 2023. She's been an honorary research fellow for the Centre for the Exploration of the Deep Human Journey at the University of Witwatersrand since 2014. One of the most remarkable anthropologists of our time, we are delighted now to award her the Rivers Medal and to invite her to say a few words about her research. Tracy. Congratulations.
Thank you very much for those very kind words, and so I'm very honoured, and especially given that this is a centenary, that makes added pressure here, and to just say that yes, I'm only a paleoanthropologist, and I say that in the sense that William Rivers was not only an anthropologist, but also a neurologist and a psychologist and a politician. So I'm feeling in some ways somewhat underqualified for this medal, but thank you nonetheless. Okay, where are we going? It's going right here. Okay, so as you just mentioned, my research is ultimately interested in the evolution of our hands. So how did our hands evolve from something that looked more like a gorilla or chimpanzee, used for locomotion, as well as grooming, feeding, and occasionally tool use, to the way our hands look today, that are capable of this amazing dexterity, amazing manipulation, and complex tool use. And so really my research the aim of it is to reconstruct behavior in the past. So how did our fossil relatives use their hands? And we do this through the study of the fossils themselves. This is the most important evidence, but also the hardest to come by. Also through high resolution imaging of the internal structure of the bone, and that's what I'll talk a little bit about today. And we can't understand how behavior is reflected in our bones without understanding the behavior itself. So we also study how apes and humans use their hands during locomotion and tool use in the zoos, in labs, and sort of in the field. And by we, I mean these lovely people and many more. They are the ones that I share this medal with because they're the ones that do most of this hard work. And so this is really just quite a group effort. And so I like to study our hands because they help us to address two really fundamental questions about human evolution. And that is, when did fossil hominins stop using trees or climbing and suspending in trees and be fully committed bipeds on the ground? And which of our fossil relatives use tools? When did they start using these? And when did this sort of transition from maybe simple and more occasional tool use transition into more complex and committed tool use? And it used to be that we thought that these two things were mutually exclusive. So if you still had to regularly use your hands for climbing in trees, that you couldn't have a hand that was well adapted for sort of habitual and complex tool use. So in the many, many fossils that we've heard about over the last 2 days, over the last 7 million years of our evolution, I'm just going to concentrate on two that we talked about that you've already mentioned and pronounced perfectly. So Australopithecus sediba and Homo naledi. And sediba is from around 2 million years ago and comes at sort of this transitional period in terms of our body plan. So she is definitely a biped walking on 2 feet, but also has longer arms and a small brain. And so these longer arms suggest that they still may have been used for climbing. And it's also a transitional period in terms of what we see in the archaeological record, moving from what we might call more simple tool use. And I know these are very, for the archaeologists in the audience, I'm sorry, these are I'm breaking this down simply, to more sort of committed or complex tool use. And then we have Homo naledi that has a body plan that's very similar to that of sediba, so ape-like in many ways, and also has a small brain, but happens to, it survives at a much more recent time period, around 300,000 years ago. At this time, we're contemporaneous with Neanderthals and the emergence of Homo sapiens. Okay. And both of these fossils are found in South Africa in the cradle of humankind and were discovered by Lee Berger and his team. And lucky for me, they both have relatively complete hand skeletons, which is really rare in the fossil record. And so when we first looked at these fossil hand skeletons came out of the ground, we first sort of looked at the external shape and wanted to address these two questions. Were each of these species still using their hands to climb? And what did they say about their tool use? Were they more occasional, sort of simple tool users, or were they more habitual, committed, complex tool users? And so we first just looked at the shape, and there are many different sort of features that distinguish our hands from that of chimpanzees, for example, that reflect our quite amazing dexterity. One of those key features is the fact that we have a long and powerful thumb relative to the length of our fingers, whereas chimpanzees have a relatively short thumb, and they also have quite curved fingers that help them to grasp trees while they're climbing. And so when we looked at sediba and naledi hand skeletons, they do look much more human-like overall. They have relatively long thumbs, and especially in the case of naledi, that thumb is quite robust and looks fairly powerful. But they also have curved fingers. So originally we said, okay, well, they look like they're showing this dual signal in terms of the shape, that they're both aspects of the hand skeleton are human-like, suggest that they were using tools, and in the case of Homo naledi, even had similarities with Neanderthals and Homo sapiens that suggest more complex tool use, but their curved fingers suggest that they're still maybe using those hands for climbing. However, behavior can evolve much faster than anatomy. And so what we can just say from the external shape of the bones is sort of this range of potential behaviors that they are potentially capable of engaging in. And what we're really interested in is the actual behavior. What were they actually doing? Because are those curved fingers, for example, still being, an indication of climbing, or are they just a primitive retention from a more arboreal ancestor that are no longer functionally relevant in these two individuals? And so this is what has been driving our research for over the last few years. It's looking at the internal bone structure. And this allows us to get more information about behavior out of the bones. And so our bones are made up of a hard outside shell, that's cortical bone, and underneath our joints is trabecular or cancellous bone. And bone is a living tissue, and so it remodels in response to how we use and load our skeletons. And so where the load or stress is really high, we'll add bone, and where that stress is low, we will lose bone. And so a great example of this is if you look at Serena Williams' left and right arms, her right dominant arm will have much thicker and more denser bone than that of her left. And so we can apply this same concept to hand bones. And so what we do this through micro CT scanning, high resolution CT scanning of bones, and there are many methodological steps here, most of which Emma knows how to do, but I don't anymore. But what I want you to pay attention to is just these pretty color maps at the end. And so what you really need to pay attention is just that where you see blue, it means there's less bone, and where you see red, it means there's lots of bone. And we assume that where we see the red bits, that this is what's informing us about how that bone or that joint was being used during life. And so we've shown in the past that indeed this trabecular structure reflects what we know of the differences in how apes use their hands during locomotion. So chimpanzee knuckle walks most of its time, in which the finger joint, the joint between the fingers and the metacarpals is extended. And when we look at the trabecular bone at that joint, it reflects that same extended posture. Whereas orangutans spend most of their time grasping with flexed fingers, and we see that same signal at that joint, in which it reflects that flexed posture of the fingers during climbing. And when we look at humans, they're unique in the sense that we can look at, these are the bones of your palm across and we can see that there's this variation in the structure across humans, which reflects how we use our fingers differently during different types of manipulation. So I'll focus just on Australopithecus sediba, and sediba shows a distinct pattern that's unlike any other living ape that we've analyzed anyway. And we can throw all that data into a principal component analysis. And this is work by Chris Dunmore. And we see that actually sediba falls out closest to orangutans. So that when we look at the trabecular structure in its fingers and its palm, it looks as if sediba is using its hand in the same way as orangutans are. Okay. But what about the thumb? So our long, powerful thumbs are really important for our tool use. So, and these are quite distinct from the very short thumbs that we see in chimpanzees. And so we looked at, again, the trabecular structure in the first metacarpal. So this is the bone at the base of your thumb that articulates with your wrist. And here we just cut that bone in half, so you're seeing a cross-section of this trabecular structure inside. And we see there's very clear differences between chimpanzees and humans, with chimps showing lots of trabecular bone, lots of red, particularly at the base, whereas humans, there's far less bone, and it's all concentrated to one side, which reflects this posture that we use when we bring our thumbs towards our fingers. Neanderthals look the same as modern humans. Early Australopiths look more intermediate. They have more bone structure like chimpanzees, but it's sort of concentrated to one side like we see in humans. And sediba and naledi look more like humans in this structure, suggesting that they're using their thumbs in a more human-like way. And so this is that same plot that you saw before, with sediba showing more orangutan-like finger use. But when we look at the thumb, sediba falls within the range of modern humans, and all other apes are sort of clustered there on their own. And so we see this really this dual signal in the sediba hand that is consistent with what we said about the sort of external morphology, the external shape, in which we see from the fingers, an ape-like signal of grasping and potentially locomotion or climbing in the trees, but a more human-like signal in the thumb of manipulation and tool use. And we see the same type of thing and also in Homo naledi, in particular with Homo naledi showing an even more human-like signal in the thumb. And so what this work has sort of shown is that, in fact, this assumption that the locomotion and tool use are not mutually exclusive, that actually you can have both of these things happen at the same time. And in fact, both of these species I would better characterize as having hands that are advantageous for or selected for two biological roles, one that is for locomotion and one that is also for tool use. And also what's interesting with these two in particular is that you could potentially have that human-like manipulation with a really small brain, which I also think is quite interesting. Okay, so with that, I just want to thank the funders, the curators, which are a really important part of all of this research, and in particular the RAI for this award, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I don't know where the medal went. Have you got it safely? Yeah, okay. Well, do you want to just open it? I'll show you how to open it and just show it.
This is my first.
Yeah, then we'll take a photo. We can take a photo. Yeah. Thank you so much. Our next award is the Marsh Award, the Marsh Award for 2023. The Marsh Award is given to a person who has made a profound impact on public life using ideas drawn from anthropology in its widest sense, but themselves are not an academic. Our winner tonight, Richard Osgood, is Senior Archaeologist at the Defence Infrastructure Organisation within the Ministry of Defence. It's perhaps not widely known that on the land owned by the MOD, there are many archaeological sites of significant interest, of which, magic number, 777 are registered as scheduled monuments. The MOD also owns elements of 10 World Heritage Sites, such as sections of Hadrian's Wall and parts of the Stonehenge World Heritage Site. Over and above these, there are unrivaled opportunities to find archaeological sites in unspoilt landscapes, thanks to the long-term military presence on the defence training estate, which prevents its development or breaking up for housing. The MOD has an obligation under UK and international law to manage this landscape, including the protection of its archaeology. Tonight's award goes to Richard Osgood, and I will just continue in a second about Richard. Richard's role is crucial in looking after an important and often little understood, therefore, part of our national heritage. But to explain, Richard is co-founder and director of Operation Nightingale, a programme that was set up in 2011 which draws upon the potential of these sites to help facilitate the recovery of armed forces personnel recently engaged in armed conflicts. To this end, a series of excavations at crash sites of Spitfires, trenches of the Western Front in the First World War, the burial grounds of convicts, campsites of Hessian mercenaries, and Anglo-Saxon cemeteries have been employed as a means of helping mentally and physically damaged veterans. Several of the participants on the programme have gone on to study for degrees, to work as professional archaeologists, and to form lifelong friendships. Some have also made discoveries of great importance that feature in national museums, such as the Barrow Clump drinking vessel, which is on display at the Wiltshire Museum of Devisers, where it will soon be joined by hundreds of other artefacts. The Saxon horse and warrior burial, which was excavated at RAF Lakenheath, can be found at the Mildenhall Museum. Indeed, so successful has been this initiative that since its founding, it has expanded to include veterans of older conflicts and of other nations, from the United States, from Poland, from Australia and elsewhere. Richard has recently explained this initiative in a monograph, Broken Pots, Mending Lives, The Archaeology of Operation Nightingale, published by Oxbow in 2023. And in 2019, he was voted Current Archaeologist of the Year. This is a wonderful example of the way that anthropology can engage with unexpected areas for the greater public good. And it is with great pleasure that we invite Richard now to say a few words about his work and receive the award. Richard. Show it to them at the end.
I will do. Right, is this one working? Yeah, hear me? Yes. Good, right. I feel a fraud, partly because you've got an archaeologist in a suit, which is a very strange occurrence, and also because I'm going to talk to you a little bit about things that are tens of thousands of years younger than you've been discussing in the last couple of days. Oops, how do you move it forward? How's forward? Oh, we use this one. Got you. Brilliant. Maybe in some ways it's not such a bizarre idea using archaeology and cultural heritage to improve the lives of people. And I've pinched this in some ways from an idea that J.L. Carr put together in a book called A Month in the Country. It's a really small book, so it's a nice, easy read. His son was an archaeologist, and it features two individuals who were badly damaged in the Great War. I was nominated for the Booker Prize, didn't win, but it's a charming read. And the two individuals were looking at restoration of a medieval church wall painting, and then just outside the churchyard looking at an Anglo-Saxon cemetery. And the two stories are interlinked beautifully. It's like a very gentle pulp fiction. If you don't want to read the book, there is also the film. So there's the film with a very young-looking Kenneth Branagh and Colin Firth. Branagh is currently appearing in London in a stage version of King Lear set in the Neolithic. So there are some nice links there. So that was a sort of way I came to it. And just listening to the papers this morning, I heard various words: connections, belonging, culture, kinship. And I think that's the sort of thing that works really well for my military people on these projects. I ask them each time what they enjoy. Sometimes it is digging, it's finding, it's sitting around a campfire telling stories. But the key thing in the middle of that Venn diagram is friendship. That's the key human thing. And I think it's all about being human. The participants in my program have gone through many fairly traumatic events. Top right, you've got Afghanistan. We've had a lot of people who are involved in those conflicts. Below it, you've got the road to Basra from the first Gulf War. And we've had people, one chap, his first day as an 18-year-old was to go and make sure the individuals on that road were dead as an 18-year-old. And I'd just challenge anyone to get through that unscathed. Bottom left, HMS Sheffield from the Falklands War, the first British ship hit with a missile. And we've had people on some of the Royal Naval ships. And my introduction to this sort of thing comes from more the top left. We haven't had any Second War veterans because they'd probably be quite elderly for field work on sites. But my dad was a veteran of the Normandy campaigns. And in the last week of his life, he would wake up each day thinking he was in Normandy still and recounting various events that he thought he was still engaged in. And it just brought it home to me that these are hidden wounds that people deal with in many and varied ways, and finding archaeology can help has been incredible. You face all sorts of weird and wonderful things. Anyone who's worked on an archaeological site, I'm sure most of you have, will know that the director doesn't like you sitting on the section. You will get shouted at if you sit on the section. Now, I've tried to employ this. I learnt this from my old professor, Barry Cunliffe. If you sit on the section, you shout at the person. So I tried to do that and realised that they weren't actually there anymore. You look on the right, because this individual had just taken his legs off so he could dig. He was more comfortable digging without his legs. He'd lost the real ones in an IED explosion. So you get very strange things. This is also great for morale. If you're working with students and they're complaining about the rain, but they can see someone without legs digging, it tends to shut them up. It's a very good thing. This is a site, Barrow Clump, that was mentioned. It's an Anglo-Saxon cemetery. We've recovered about 100 bodies that were being excavated very, very efficiently, but with very poor recording by badgers. And that's one of the reasons we've done this work. All the sites we work on have to have a genuine reason for doing the field work. About 100 remains, and halfway through the project we noticed there was an area that had a lot of burials with shields in, and one of the young riflemen said to me, "Do you think that's a shield wall that people are protecting the others in the barrow at the front. It may or may not be, but it was a very elegant theory from someone with no archaeological experience at all. They recovered things like this. These are accoutrements found with a female burial. These are button brooches. Snarly face of a warrior, potentially. If you've been a pub at chuck-out time on the training area, it's probably quite similar. You have beads, small square-headed brooches, and then design classics. That's a cosmetics brush from the 6th century. And the artifacts that they are finding, we heard about the little drinking vessel, are really quite spectacular. This is a talismanic bead found with a female burial about 3 or 4 months ago. And we've had 3 of these perforated coins shatter, which has pushed back our understanding of the extent of these coins. And they've been used as decorative pieces of necklaces. And you heard about ostrich egg necklace pieces. Well, you know, hanging things from the neck is something that I guess will always be done by humans. And I love these connections. Just even thinking about looking at sediments and DNA, it's making me think things we can do in more modern sites. And some of the archaeological artifacts also link to the people themselves on the project. We work on old sites, well, for me, old, not for you, Neolithic stuff from about 5,000 plus years ago, but also from the 20th century, and it's all about people, bringing you back to people. The dig last year found this dog tag. It's, again, not like doing prehistory. You'll be very jealous. It has the name of the person who used it, Carl Fenstermaker. It's got his tetanus jab date, the fact that he is blood type O, and he's a Protestant. So we've got some nice details on there about this person. He was one of 2 pathfinders from Easy Company, the most famous American military unit of the Second World War, known as the Band of Brothers. So he's a paratrooper. He drops 3 times into conflict zones. First day was on D-Day, where he's shot down into the Channel. He's German-speaking, Carl Fenstermaker, so he hails the nearest ship in German, thinking it's the German Navy, but it's the Royal Navy. So he's promptly arrested and spends the first day of D-Day under the arrest of the Royal Navy. He then jumps into Operation Market Garden, and then the third jump he does into Bastogne in the Battle of the Bulge. But what did for him, actually, was being the German translator at Dachau, at the concentration camp. And so he was unable to hold a job down at the end of the war because of the mental health traumas that he'd experienced. And for me, he's a bit of a poster boy for all the archaeologists we have on site now. We get them doing all sorts of things. This is experimental work. This is a Bronze Age roundhouse that we built at Butser Ancient Farm based on the footprint of one we excavated at Salisbury Plain with the post holes. We've got them to make colour from local sources, experimental turf walls, experimental cob walls and gabions, and we're putting thermocouples into these walls as well, just to see how well they last. So it's giving good scientific data to the prehistorians engaged on the programme as well. And the key thing is finding lots of things for people to do, to have hope maybe and a progress in the future. The chap that looks a bit like Van Gogh here, he was an ex-submariner. He hadn't left his house for a year after what had happened to him, but we've got him out learning about thatching, and he then engaged a training regime that he'd learned from the thatcher to teach other people how to do these, and he's now just finished his 2nd year in archaeology at the University of Winchester. The drinking bucket mentioned was found by this chap, Rowan Kendrick, 5th Battalion of the Rifles. That's the bucket with stems of yew. That's 6th century wood. It's probably the best preserved type of this bucket in Britain, with these bands of bronze and repoussé decoration. Here's Kenny excavating it, and he took about 4 or 5 days to excavate this burial. And I asked him, was he not bored spending so much time? And he said, nope, because I'm spending so much time so I don't make a mess of it and get told off by Jackie McKinley that I'm sleeping for the first time properly since Iraq. So if nothing else, my projects help people to go to sleep, which is a good thing. And if you go to the British Museum, not too far from here, there is this picture of the bucket, and it says, man buried with a small bucket and a spear from the Anglo-Saxon cemetery at Barraclump in Wiltshire, copyright Wessex Archaeology, burial excavated by Rifleman Rowan Kendrick of 5 Rifles. So he's got his name in the British Museum, which is something I don't think I ever will. Sean is another of our new veterans. He's a Falklands veteran. That's what happened to his ship in the Falklands War, and it was hit with a missile. He was self-medicating quite dramatically, but now is at Bradford University, where he's finishing his 3rd year of a BSc in archaeological science. Key as well is to get the data out there. This is Dickie Bennett, who's a Royal Marine Commando. He now has a first-class degree from the University of Exeter in archaeology, a master's degree, and he's now putting together a PhD on the empirical data about how this stuff works, looking at anxiety and depression using the standard NHS techniques, but developing a more bespoke methodology of analysing how it's helping people. He has published a paper in Antiquity, open source, so you can see just how these things work. Thank you for the book plug earlier. Just in case it didn't happen, here's a picture of it, and all money goes to a military charity. But thank you ever so much for this award. It's just lovely to see the programme, the working, being acknowledged in a very wide sphere. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, yes. So shall we? The next award is for Public Anthropology Award, RAI Award for 2023. The RAI Prize in Public Anthropology is given to Sarah Tarlow, Professor of Historical Archaeology at the University of Leicester. Sarah received her PhD from the University of Cambridge in 1995 and then taught at the University of Wales, Lampeter, until 2000, after which she moved to the University of Leicester. Her research has been concerned with the archaeology of Britain since medieval times, the ethic of improvement in the 18th and 19th centuries, and the archaeology of death, burial, and commemoration. Among her many publications are Ritual, Belief and the Dead in Early Modern Britain and Ireland, published in 2013, The Archaeology of Improvement, Britain 1750 to 1850, published in 2007, and The Archaeology of Death in Post-Medieval Europe in 2015. From 2011 to 2016, Tarlow directed the large-scale research project Harnessing the Power of sorry, I'm hesitating here. This is such a wonderful title, apologies. Harnessing the Power of the Criminal Corpse, funded by the Wellcome Trust. The study focused on the period between the 16th century and the 20th century and investigated the management, treatment, and uses of the criminal corpse in Britain. The project's overall goal was an examination and discussion of the changing ideas of self and person as they relate to the body. What, however, marks her so clearly as making a major contribution beyond the academic sphere is her recent monograph, Archaeology of Loss, Life, Love and the Art of Dying, published by Picador in 2023. In effect, this is a memoir that Sarah wrote following the death of her partner, Mark Plochenik, after a long and difficult illness. In it, she reflects on her loss in a way that's informed by her lifetime of reflection on bereavement. It's been hailed as a major contribution to a public debate on death and mourning. Various of the reviews that have been received describe this work as extraordinary, unflinching, wonderful, moving, or a poetic excavation of loss, grief, and ritual. Another writes, in Archaeology of Loss, Sarah Tarlow has harnessed the consoling power of unvarnished truth. Direct, honest, and deeply compassionate, this book is a companion for anyone navigating the hardships of loss and uncertainty, but it's also a celebration of all that love can stretch to hold. Informed by both Tarlow's lived experience and perspective as an archaeologist, it asks vital questions about what it means to live and die well. I found it both thought-provoking and moving. Yet another, this time from the Time, states, bracingly candid, digs away at our collective fantasy that in dying or caring for the dying, we are at our best. In reality, in either role, we are often withdrawn, in pain, resentful, bad-tempered, our worst, addictively unsentimental. It is with great pleasure, therefore, that we award Professor Tarlow the 2023 Public Anthropology Prize and ask her to say a few words about her work. Professor Tarlow. I'm afraid it's an unglamorous box, but inside is a beautiful glass vessel. So
that's very exciting. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I've never had an award before, so I'm very delighted. Actually, I should take one of these, shouldn't I? Both of them? This one? Okay. So I'm delighted to receive this honour from the RAI. And it is possible that not everybody in the room has read my book, but here it is, available in all good bookshops, and only 7 weeks till Christmas, I think maybe worth bearing in mind. And it's just possible that there are several people here who have no idea who I am or why I'm here, which is quite understandable. I'm not entirely sure myself. And I never set out to do public anthropology, just to try a different kind of writing from the usual academic articles and monographs. So I don't have any slides, but I'll briefly describe the book, what I was trying to do with it, and how I came late and unexpectedly to the territory of public anthropology. For more than 30 years, I've taught and researched historical archaeology, and I've been at Leicester University since 2000. For my whole career, I've been interested in the archaeology of death and burial, not as an osteoarchaeologist, but as a person drawn to the challenge of understanding the relationship between the living and the dead, and the way that death was understood, with all of its contradictions and its emotional richness. It was the subject of my PhD, and since then I've written a bunch of books and articles on those themes and others, led research projects, taught courses, and all the usual academic stuff. So this kind of work means I've always occupied the intellectual spaces at the edge of the discipline, and I find that I read and research as much history, anthropology, and literature as I do archaeology. It's been a good career so far. So that's my professional story. But I also have a personal story. About 12 years ago, my partner, Mark Pluchenik, another archaeologist, began to suffer neurological symptoms. We were at the time living in Melton Mowbray with our 3 children when he had his first seizure. Over the next few years, his symptoms got worse and worse, and no treatment had much of an effect on the slow progress of his myeloencephalitis. By the end of his life in 2016, he was bedridden, doubly incontinent, couldn't smell or taste, often couldn't see, and he was in constant pain and discomfort. And there were mental effects as well. It was a terrible time for all of us. In the end, he waited until the children and I were out of the house and ended his own life with drugs that he'd bought online. For a long time after that, I was too emotional and too fatigued to do anything with that experience. But 3 years ago, I started pulling together my memories and thoughts into a book, which eventually became The Archaeology of Loss. So what The Archaeology of Loss is a memoir about dying, about caring, about memory. And at first, it wasn't very much about archaeology, but early readers and my publisher wanted more of what was distinctive about me, which was my archaeological expertise. And my first thoughts were, I don't do the right kind of archaeology for popular consumption. I thought people want to hear about archaeologists who dig up stuff, spectacular finds and so on, or work with materials in labs using cutting-edge techniques. And it's years since I did that kind of fieldwork, and I'm not an archaeological scientist. My work was always about interpretation, telling stories, asking questions. So I started off struggling, going back years to remember the more stereotypically archaeological fieldwork I'd undertaken in the past, the excavations and so on, and trying to shoehorn it into the book. But that didn't really work. So I decided, why not just try being straightforward about what it is I actually do? After all, that's what I love about archaeology, not just finding material or learning new facts, but finding narratives, exploring possibilities. And that, to me, is what's always been the greatest thing about archaeology and anthropology, and indeed about good social history, too. It can make you think in different colours, understand that things might be very different to what seems familiar and natural to us. That dizzy moment of having the conceptual rug pulled from under you is the biggest intellectual thrill for me. Could I perhaps convey some of that? Not necessarily using my own primary data, but showing how the form of a burial, or the glaze on a pot, or the story of a bone might be used to talk about what mattered to people in the past, how they experienced their world and related to each other. So rather than talking about retrieval of evidence, could I write about the imaginative and generative process of moving from evidence to story? And could I talk critically about the kinds of stories we usually construct? Could I undermine the usual romantic stories that characterize a grief memoir, which it turns out was the segment of the market that I was stepping into, by offering alternative ways of experiencing mortality and bereavement? Moreover, could I use archaeology as a springboard to discuss contemporary issues about which I felt strongly, such as the treatment of disability and of carers and of suicide and the right to die? It struck me also that the business of writing memoir is not so different to the business of doing archaeology. Like archaeology, in writing memoir, I was working with unreliable data, probably misunderstood, half remembered or entirely forgotten. I would never get to a single and authoritative truth about my own past, just as I would never achieve certainty in my stories about the more ancient past. Instead, in both cases, I had fragments of information, possibly inaccurate, a truth that was often more an emotional truth than a factually demonstrable one, data that was never enough, never representative, of uncertain relevance, and their interpretation always ambiguous. So I was surprised and delighted that the readers of the Archaeology of Loss so far have responded so well to the kind of archaeology that I actually do, as well as to the kind of archaeology that is usually served up for public engagement. I even met with a film and TV producer who wanted to ask me whether there was scope for an archaeologist like me, but younger and hotter and living in the US, to use her expertise in archaeological theory and the archaeology of emotion to form the central conceit of a crime-solving drama series. Whether or not that happens, and I suspect not, I hope there is an opportunity here not to change, but to broaden popular ideas of what archaeologists do beyond the technical aspects of data collection and analysis, and into the theoretical and interpretive part of the work, which is always what gets me and many of my colleagues out of bed and into the department in the morning. I am so grateful and honoured that you've chosen to recognise this attempt to do a slightly different kind of public anthropology. And I would like to thank my family and friends and colleagues for being so very supportive of this whole endeavour. And particularly, I would like to thank the RAI for this great honour. Thanks very much.
Take that, yes. Yes, yeah. We might find a way of doing that.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will reveal shortly. It's my great pleasure now to award Presidential Lifetime Achievement Award for 2023. This year, unusually, we've decided to award 2 Presidential Lifetime Achievement Awards. The first of these is to Professor James C. Scott. Professor Scott is known to generations of students in social anthropology and indeed the social sciences as a whole for his seminal contributions, not least Weapons of the Weak, Everyday Forms of Peasant Resistance, which has been read and studied by literally thousands of students, many of whom have gone on to teach his ideas to their students in turn. Sadly, through ill health, he's unable to be with us today. We have therefore deferred his presentation until we hope he is able to come across from North America to be with us in person. We look forward to that occasion, hope that it will be soon, and we will certainly keep you all informed of that. Now, however, we move to the second of our winners in this category, Professor Bernard Wood. Professor Bernard Wood has been a leading figure in the study of human origins for more than 50 years. His research is directed towards understanding the evolution of the hominid lineage, with a focus on hominin adaptations and the processes and factors that shaped hominin evolution. He was involved from an early stage in the expeditions at East Turkana, led by Richard Leakey and Glyn Isaac, and took on responsibility for describing and interpreting the finds belonging to early Homo. These are amongst the most complete finds, bordering on 2 million years old. Bernard Wood's anatomical descriptions and research have been pivotal in establishing the species of early Homo and their overlaps in space and time, as well as in their species classifications. This work culminated in publication of a large monograph of enduring value in the Kubi Foro series. Subsequently, Bernard Wood set up a research group in human origins at the University of Liverpool, one facet of which included promoting research in Uganda and supporting Makerere Medical School at a politically difficult time. He then moved to George Washington University, where he has remained strongly active across a wide range of research and undertook the massive task of organising an encyclopedia of human evolution, which is standard work within the discipline. Bernard Wood received his PhD in 1975 and then worked as a faculty member in the University of London, becoming University Reader in Anatomy in 1978, and S.A. Courtauld, I see we have a connection there, Professor of Anatomy in 1982. In 1985, he moved to the University of Liverpool as the Derby Professor of Anatomy and the Head of Department of Human Anatomy and Cell Biology, and in 1996, he was appointed Dean of the Medical School of the University of Liverpool. In 1997, he was appointed Henry R. Luce Professor of Human Origins and Professor of Human Evolutionary Anatomy at the George Washington University and Adjunct Senior Scientist at the National Museum of Natural History of the Smithsonian Institution. In 2006, he was appointed University Professor of Human Origins at GWU, George Washington University. He is presently Director of the Centre of Advanced Study of Human Paleobiology at GWU. Professor Wood served as President of the Primate Society of Great Britain and Ireland from 1986 to 1989, President of the Anatomical Society of Great Britain and Ireland 1996 to 97, Vice President of the Royal Anthropological Institute 1989 to 92, Member of the UK Science and Engineering Research Council and Chair of its Science-Based Archaeology Committee 1986 to 1994, Member of the UK Natural Environment Research Council and Chair of its Science-Based Archaeology Strategy Group from 1994 to 96, Member of the UK Natural Environment Research Council, Earth Sciences, Science and Technology Board from 1994 to 6, and a member of the Bioarchaeology Panel of the Wellcome Trust 1995 to 2000. He was elected an Honorary Fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons of England in 2007. I think that says a lot, all of that. And therefore, to sum up, it's no surprise to you that I say that Bernard Wood has made a major cumulative and continuing contribution to the analysis and interpretation of the hominin fossil record, with hundreds of publications, scholarly monographs and books. He has enabled innumerable, I think it's around 50 plus, maybe, PhD studentships and postdoctoral researchers to carry out research on aspects of human evolution, many of whom have gone to have outstanding careers of their own in this area of science. It's therefore with great pleasure that we would like to make this award to you, Professor Bernard Wood. I'm going to give it to you and then take it away. And for those
It's the one you gave to her.
It's slightly different. we made a revelation later, right at the end. I think my colleagues were concerned that they might slip from my hands and yours to great disastrous effect. So
Deborah,
they will be revealed later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I don't know who that person is, but they have asked me to respond to the award. I'm deeply grateful to the President and to the Council, and I would like to just spend a few minutes explaining my, really to express my thanks to the people that really are behind this. It's extremely difficult to speak after Tracy, after Richard, and after this. But I will do my best. When I was a medical student in 1964, we were taught anatomy, and we had demonstrators who instructed us. And the two demonstrators, when I was a medical student, were an officer in the Special Air Service Regiment and a rugby international who was an Australian. And the rugby international who was an Australian, he came in after one weekend and he said, Jesus, he said, I've just been to Ascot. And he said, I had to hire a suit and it had 3 pieces. So Richard's suit has 3 pieces. So I just want to say how wonderful it is to share this afternoon with the 3 of you. My mentor was Michael Day, he taught me anatomy, and he became my PhD advisor. Michael Day may be known to some of you because he was the president of the, if I could have the next slide, the Royal Anthropological Institute. I'm not sure. I do that. Yes. Okay. Good. Okay. He became the president, and he was really a very influential president because I think Michael Day's work and influence put the RAI onto a financial footing, which I think it still recognizes today. When I was a medical student, I did a Bachelor of Science, and if you're a medical student, you can take some of the credits from the Faculty of Medicine, and you can take them into the Faculty of Science, and you can do a Bachelor of Science in double quick time. And so that's what I did, and I was interested in anatomy, so I did a Bachelor of Science in anatomy. And the project I did for my Bachelor of Science in anatomy was actually my first publication. This was a time when the dinosaurs still roamed the earth, and this was 1968, and it's a publication in a journal called Man, which was the old name for the Journal of the Royal Anthropological Institute. So that's why I thought you were giving me this award. It wasn't that good a paper, but that's why I thought you were giving me this award. Michael was involved in the work at Olduvai Gorge, and he was quite friendly with Mary Leakey. And when you're a medical student, towards the end of your training, there is a 2-month period called the elective period, where you can go outside. And most of my colleagues went either to hospitals in North America or to mission hospitals in India or to the Red Cross Hospital in Cape Town or somewhere like that. Michael suggested that I go. He would try and get me, see if I could go with Richard Leakey when he went to East Rudolph in 1968. So Michael asked Mary, who instructed Richard to take me with him. And Richard says it's the last time he ever did what his mother told him. And so I went up to East Rudolph in 1968. And although I went back into medicine and I did surgery for a while, it was really human evolution and the continuation of that interest in anatomy that actually brought me into the world of paleoanthropology. And so the next slide is, oh, no, I've managed to turn it off, okay. And the next slide is of Richard, who was the person who, to whom I owe my career. There were three of us, there were three anatomists who were describing the fossils that were being recovered from what was then known as East Rudolph. There was myself, and Michael Day, who was the senior, and then somebody called Alan Walker, who was much more senior than me, but not quite as senior as Michael. So we had to decide who was going to describe the skull and the teeth, who was going to describe the limb bones, and who was going to work on sort of other things like demography and paleopathology. Michael Day had been working on the limb bones, the ham bones, and the ham bones and the foot bones from Alderby Gorge. Alan Walker's, he was interested in locomotion, and the only paper I had published was my BSc, which was on the talus, which is a foot bone. And so that's the only thing I knew about, okay. So we couldn't decide who would do the skulls. None of us wanted to do the skulls. So Richard was exasperated. And so at a meeting in New York, we were all in his room, and he said, you know, you guys need to make your mind up. But Richard insisted that this was not to be done by who was the oldest, okay. So he said, if you can't make your mind up, I'm going to go into the bathroom and I'm going to break 3 matches, and I'm going to come out and you're going to have to choose a match. And the person who has the longest match can choose what they do. The person who has the second longest match can then choose what the, he also have a choice, and the person with the shortest match has no choice. So Richard went into the bathroom and he came back with the matches. Michael Day chose the longest match, and he chose to do the postcranial bones. Then Alan Walker got the second longest match, and Richard just looked at me and he said, Woody, you're going to do the head. So that's what I did, you know, because mostly you did what Richard told you. And so that essentially determined my career. So the first message to anybody relatively young in the room is that you might make a choice about your career, but you might not. And if an opportunity comes up, then you should take it. So that's my first piece of advice. So the next person I want to thank is Mair, who became married to Richard, and who, when Richard really disagreed with my interpretations of the fossils, managed to persuade Richard, just let Woody get on with it and stop trying to stop trying to change his mind. So Mair is still alive, and I really want to express my gratitude for her intervention, and also my respect for the work that she's done independently. The last person, well, not the last one person, the last individual I want to thank is Glenn Isaac. Now, I'm not an archaeologist, and I had 0 education in archaeology. But my education in archaeology really came from being in the field with this wonderful man. And the point about Glenn was that he wasn't really an archaeologist. He was interested in the evolution of human behavior. He just used to use archaeology to try and get at it. He was a wonderful biologist, and I miss him deeply. Lastly, I'm not sure it's a complete list. There are 6 grandchildren in my family, and I have difficulty remembering their names. So if I've missed out any graduate students, I apologize. But I tried to list the graduate students and the postdocs who have had the misfortune to be influenced by me. The next piece of advice is never accept a student or a postdoc unless you're convinced they're smarter than you are. And so so to all these people, my thanks. They think I educated and trained them. In fact, they actually educated and trained me. And so I want to express my thanks. I don't know whether any of them are in the room, but I want to express my thanks. So that brings me back to this award and and when I got the email from David Shanklin, of course, I was extremely flattered, but I was also slightly alarmed. I was really alarmed by the use of the word lifetime. And the notion that they may know more about my health than I do sort of slightly alarmed me, and I would ask them, when they reflect on the use of lifetime in the future, that they warn people that, there's nothing that they sort of know especially. Okay. So on the assumption that my health will make it until the end of the evening, I want to reiterate my thanks to the Royal Anthropological Institute, and I want to say that the Middlesex Hospital Medical School, where I trained with Michael Day, was very close to the RAI in Fitzroy Square. And so Michael used to take me. And in those days, there was Raymond Firth and Edmund Leach. And I'm sorry, I'm sure I'm going to offend a lot of people, but those were the days when the social anthropologists actually still spoke English, and you could understand their talks, okay? Nowadays, quite often when I go to talks by cultural anthropologists, I really don't understand what they're talking about because they use words that I don't understand. They claim that I use words that they don't understand when I use the word talus or hamate or something of that sort, but I can't change that. That's what they're called. So I'm sorry to offend people, but those are really great times when you could go to the RAI and there were really substantial, I'm sure there are substantial things going on now, but these were great people. So my thanks to the RAI and my thanks to all of you for your attendance this afternoon. And they say, you should never act with animals and children. You should never follow Tracy Kivell, Richard Osgood, and Sarah. Okay.
By popular demand, we were going to excavate this lovely box. So it is not a secret. And when I first became a curator at the V&A, I refused to handle objects. They were rather special objects, but I was convinced I would drop the most valuable of them. But I will let you unwrap the last bit.
Oh, that's not fair. Okay. Wow.
Hopefully very simple and very elegant, but it is engraved.
It's absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Then we put it back in again, yes.
Put it back in its box.
Put it back in its box, yes.
Thank you very much.
think that will be secure, yes.
Thank you very much.
Will you go again?
Thank you.
Thank you. The next award is let me say, in physical terms, less hazardous. And this is the Patron's Medal. The Royal Anthropological Institute Patron's Medal is given occasionally to a member of staff who has made an exceptional and long-standing contribution to the work of the RAI over and above the normal call of duty. Sarah Walpole is one such person. She has paid the RAI the remarkable compliment of working with us through the whole of her career as an archivist. Sarah joined the RAI whilst we were still at the Museum of Mankind, where she was trained initially by Brownlee Kirkpatrick and then Beverley Amory. Adopting their cataloguing procedures, she in fact has become a third-generation archivist, providing intellectual continuity on a collection that is now of world importance to the history of anthropology. During her long career, she's achieved many notable achievements. She's overseen the reopening of the archives at Fitzroy Street, their present home after the transfer of our main library to the museum. She has welcomed hundreds, if not thousands, of visitors from across the world to it, so that it has become a place where not only research takes place, but where it's possible to meet researchers looking at a huge variety of topics. She's taken responsibility for ensuring that there is an integrated collections policy across manuscripts, archives, and photographs. She's overseen the digitization of its holdings so that now the vast proportion of our core holdings is preserved, and in recent years taken an active interest into the history of the RAI, compiling an invaluable fellowship database with many thousands of entries. This remarkable project will provide the Institute with a resource that will be a source of interest and discovery as long as there are readers. It has a simple premise, that as each fellow of the Institute becomes the subject of a query, the details gleaned about them will be recorded. This sounds simple, but is in fact potentially immensely complicated, because there's a myriad of details that can be gleaned about any one person who has become part of the RAI, from their time on committees or council, their public career, publications, profession, qualifications, decorations, spouse, other clubs, societies, and so on. As we learn more about each person, so does their life come gradually to life on our database, so that very often now, at the stroke of a key, we can learn more about them than we should ever have thought possible. As it is ongoing, further information will continue to accumulate. We learned last week, for example, that Balfour was a member of the Fly Fishers Club. This may sound a tiny detail, indeed it is, but should we eventually see that other members of the RAI were also members of that no doubt estimable institution, we may discern a new pattern in the way knowledge networks came together during the 19th and 20th century, and so history continues to be rewritten. Finally, in her last decade before leaving the RAI, Sarah has worked on the history of the RAI, so that by the time that she retired, we have a consecutive account of what she herself calls the nuts and bolts of the Institute from the period from 1834 to 2010. For the first time, therefore, we have a continuous account of the chief preoccupations and material concerns of the Institute from its foundation until the present day, where we have lived, how we raised money, a perennial concern, as was referenced just now, the chief projects that we were concerned with, and so on. Just as so much of Sarah Walpole's work, this will be an essential and much-studied resource in years to come. We are immeasurably indebted to her and delighted to award her. Sarah. The sixth and final award is the Now, I just need to check that our award winner is here. Good. Hello. Sorry, I hadn't met before. The final award is the Lucy Mair Medal and Marsh Prize to Sushrut Jadhav. The Lucy Mair Medal and Marsh Prize is awarded to applied anthropology, particularly to those researchers who have devoted themselves to upholding human dignity. Professor Sushrut Jadhav, our Lucy Mair and Marsh Prize winner this evening, is just such a person. Indeed, his benign and positive influence can be seen in multiple ways. He is Professor of Cultural Psychiatry, Consultant Psychiatrist for the Homeless, Camden and Islington NHS Trust, as well as founding editor and editor-in-chief of the Journal of Anthropology and Medicine. Previously, Professor Jadhav obtained his PhD from University College London in 2000, having become a Doctor of Medicine at the National Institute of Mental Health and Neuroscience in Bangalore, India in 1986, and Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery from the University of Bombay in 1983. He became clinical lecturer in adult psychiatry at UCL in 2001, where he holds his current chair. More generally, Dr. Jadhav has directed and co-directed ethnographic research on mental health and marginality in the UK and India. He has taught extensively on medical anthropology and cultural psychiatry programs at several national and international universities. Dr. Jadhav was also advisor to DSM-5 task force on cultural formulation. The DSM is the defining manual on the classification of mental disorders worldwide, published by the American Psychiatric Association. In his professional roles, he's devoted himself tirelessly to the mental well-being of those who are most likely to be discriminated against, to homeless communities in the UK and India, black and ethnic minority patients in the UK, and the Dalit, formerly untouchable groups in India. He's pioneered the Bloomsbury Cultural Formulation Interview, which adopts an innovative approach to engage with acutely unwell patients in mental health and other cultural contexts. This, as you might imagine, involves a cultural dialogue between professionals, patients, institutions, and communities. Another way of presenting Professor Jadhav's approach is to say that he is profoundly sensitive to those wider constraints of society which impose upon those less fortunate feelings of helplessness, degradation, and exclusion from social acceptance. In order to examine these questions in Britain, he's borrowed ideas that have been developed to understand the Indian caste system, giving his work a profoundly international dimension. In so doing, in his own words, he's opened up the wall of the clinic to much wider influences and creative solutions than hitherto had been thought possible. Yet Professor Jadhav does not seek to blame. At the same time as working to heal those who have been oppressed, he's acutely aware that the oppressor too may need help to become aware, then to overcome the alienation that their role has brought to them. Through such dialogue, he hopes and indeed has been able to help patients achieve a peace with themselves that they had never thought possible. It's a very great pleasure that I now invite Professor Jadhav to receive the Lucy Mair Medal and Marsh Prize. Professor Jadhav.
Do we have time?
We have, yes, absolutely, yes.
I'll move into this.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for accommodating me. And I was asked to say a few words, and so I shall keep it short. I wanted to actually share stories with you all from the streets of London, as well as from India. But as it happens, 10 minutes or that kind of a time is not enough to share all these stories. And so I'll try and just share one story. But before that, I want to thank you all for the committee, for bestowing upon me this award. I'm delighted and surprised to be chosen, as there are so many of us who are tirelessly working and at this process of dignification and are passionate about desiring a socially just society. I think I would like to dedicate this gong to my team, my colleagues, both here in London, who work as part of the Homeless Mental Health Services at Camden Islington Mental Health Trust, as well as to comrades at several metropolitan sites in India. I think their friendship and their support has both sustained and nourished me to become who I am. It's also a pleasure and a surprise to see my mentor and PhD supervisor, Roland Littlewood, here in front of me, with whom I did my PhD, and whose footsteps I followed with working with the homeless population. Is there a way I could show with this slide? Yes. This is the slide, this is the site where we worked, and my team still works there, to whom also I dedicate this award. It's just in Camden off Greenland Road, provides a service for the mentally unwell population. We're a team of about 12 people, social workers, nurses, and psychiatrists. A few years ago, we were slashed by about half our team budget, but we continue to survive and carry on what is possible with hope that we can still make a difference, not just to the lives of those others out there, but primarily beginning with ourselves. This is a listed building, as some of you might know. Charles Dickens once upon a time lived there as a young boy when his family was in trouble, his father was in prison, and those were difficult days for him. I just want to share with you, before I tell you the story, the broader context, specifically focusing on a very hostile landscape of the city. We work collaboratively with many social institutions, religious institutions included, and I wanted to share with you the kind of scaping that is taking place. That is the Wellcome Institute at the bottom. That's a center of Tottenham Court Road. And what you might notice are the spikes there, which prevent people from either sitting, taking a rest, or going off to sleep. In the same way, you might notice here, and perhaps you're aware, that the homeless are washed away and sprayed. They're not allowed to sleep. Sleep, in fact, is one of the most powerful issues that actually is a contest between those who can and who cannot sleep. You might not get to see that from the rear, but this is the front part of the Wellcome Institute, and you can see the very curious and very interesting juxtaposition, offering hope and healing on the one hand, with spikes that can poke you, hurt you, or rolling grills there, which you can find near a heated vent, where the homeless would like to sleep, and they did sleep. We had a Ghanaian university student from London who paid a huge amount of money and had a breakdown halfway through, wanted his money back because he could not go back to his village, who had donated the money for his fees and gave him a departure, send-off to study in London with huge pomp. He just had no ability to do anything but ask for his university in London to give back the remaining fees that they owed him. And until then, because he had no place, he lost his hostel room. He was sleeping on the grill, which was initially flat. But the institutions constructed grills that made sure that if you're not poked, you roll off to the floor, to the ground. I'm actually also reminded of a documentary by a friend of mine, Shaunak Sen, about a few years ago, called The Cities of Sleep, which is a philosophical, psychological, and cultural exposition on the idea of horizontality and sleep. One of the characters in his documentary has this to say: if you want to seize control over someone, never let them sleep. As we speak, the hostility of the architecture and the way in which the city is being escaped by powerful institutions is getting more difficult. And the idea of a person having to go horizontal for a period of night when we all can and we must is interestingly very difficult and challenging. Now I want to come to the story given the context and the landscape of one particular gentleman. This is a geographical depiction of Camden and its adjacent richer borough, Hampstead. You have the RAI here near the Great Portland Street at the bottom end. That's where our offices are located. That's the house where Dr. B.R. Ambedkar lived and studied when he was at the London School of Economics. And that's a UCL Academy, which I often have wondered, next door to a man whom we saw who lived in a disused dustbin. It's obvious that I wanted to type out Pedagogies of the Oppressed, because if we don't let the stories of what is happening come into our classrooms and talk and dialogue and learn, then what use, according to Paulo Freire, is our learning? And to add to that, if for anyone, if the right kind of conditions are made available, anyone can learn and progress in their careers. Some years ago, we received a request from Camden Council to look up a gentleman who they said was sleeping in a disused dustbin near Swiss Cottage. We saw him in what we do as an early morning outreach at about 5:30 to 7 o'clock in the morning, because when the city wakes up, it renders the homeless invisible. So the homeless have to wake up, find a place where they can wash, drink, piss, shit, clean themselves, and prepare for the day. The pictures I showed you earlier are some of those sites that the homeless would want to go to deal and face the day. We saw this gentleman in the early morning outreach. This was a few years ago, and I remember distinctly, because this is something to do with this gentleman, that the invasion of Iraq by NATO in the US had taken place a while before that. And this gentleman came to us, introduced himself as coming from Baghdad, and all he wanted was us to send him home. Every time we met him in our morning outreach, he would meet us with gratitude and embarrassment that such well-off, highly qualified people were coming to see him. And each time he apologized for his position and his state. And each time he came with a bottle of water clutched underneath his arms and kept asking us to send him home. We inquired, he had no papers, no passport. We didn't have the money to buy him a ticket, but what we did do was we continued to meet with him. We spent time, exchanged our narratives through techniques that included what we just shared with you, cartographic techniques that I developed in map making and our social journeys through the corridors of the archaeologies across cultures, how we arrive and have our encounters, and how do we co-constitute our narratives. And that's all we kept doing, hoping against hope that we could find a way for this gentleman to go back home. He wasn't mentally unwell. He was certainly very distressed, but I would not call him as suffering from a mental disorder. He was suffering from a disorder of displacement, which is again a separate matter to talk about. But anyway, what happened was that we suggested that we might perhaps get an address of him and write to his family. He gave us an address, which he could remember very well. It was in Baghdad. We posted the letter on his behalf because he had no money. We put a tracker on the letter. The letter never reached anywhere. And so this was a situation for us where each time he continued to meet with us and said, and pleaded, please send me home. He was surprisingly neat and tidy. The local cafe looked after him. They fed him, gave him his coffee in the morning. And apart from encouraging his relative safety in that disused dustbin and food vouchers that we could give him, we could not do anything more. And then one fine day, we couldn't find him. We repeated our visits, we talked to people around, he had gone missing. And like so many of us who get invisibilized because of the forces that we have to work against and quite often end up with an experience of social defeat, we accepted that this was perhaps something that we could not do much. A couple of years later, on a routine day in our homeless street clinics, we received a message and a picture. And there he was. I have his permission to share this in an educational context, to be able to help his narrative reach all of you. He had managed to reach Baghdad, and he's back at his home and with his family having a meal. The substantiation of all that has happened, including emotions that were involved, have perhaps transfigured and reconfigured into a hearty meal where there is, for him, home at last. As we continue to fight to help all of us reclaim our dignity and live our lives, I would probably want to finish with a quote, because if I had to go into a second story, I might take even longer than the first story. But it is just to tell you that the problem may have been a few years ago. It's expanding, it's an epidemic, it's cross proportions that are difficult to imagine, but easier to experience. As I work on the streets, I find middle-class people walking past homeless. They might look at their dog and make eye contact, but they won't make eye contact with my subjects. So I finish with a quote by a friend and colleague, Arundhati Roy, from her most recent novel, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. It's about what do we do and where do we go from here, with hope, and how much of that hope, and how can we instill that hope. So to quote Arundhati Roy, she says, "There seems to be no hope, but pretending to be hopeful is the only grace we have," from her novel, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. Thank you again very much for listening to me and for this award, which I would accept on behalf of my comrades. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so very much for those very thought-provoking, emotion-stirring words. And thank you to all of our medal award winners today, all of whom have spoken so wonderfully to us, each in their several ways, but all of them equally thought-provoking and showing also the range of application, if I might quote, of this large subject, which I'm going to embrace in the word anthropology, as of the Royal Anthropological Institute. I think we couldn't have had a better reinforcement of the significance of this broad, multifaceted discipline. So thank you so much.